our very special guest this morning, a friend of the platform, and any friend of the platform is a friend of mine. Craig Stobo joins me now. Craig, thank you very much for your time. Firstly, because Sean wanted to know, what are you doing for Matariki?
Hello, Miles. How are you? Thank you for that kind of introduction. I'm going to be a combination of working and resting, unfortunately. So you can't necessarily compress 5 days of work into 4 days. So I'll be working and doing a bit of R&R.
Well, I hope you get to spend time with the loved ones. Anyway, that's assuming that anyone loves you, Craig. Right. First of all, local government funding agency. All right. Now you're the chair of that. It completed its 100th debt raising for councils last week. What does the local government funding agency actually do?
Well, thank you for that query, and it's a case of trying to ensure your listeners know and appreciate what we're trying to do for, particularly for ratepayers. So our purpose is to benefit local communities through delivering efficient funding for local government. So we started in 2011 when we were incorporated as a company, and our 10th anniversary was obviously the end of 2021. We're going to hold a birthday bash then, but we're in lockdown, so the celebration last week at NZX was to celebrate 100 tenders or 100 occasions where we raised debt capital from the capital markets. But by way of structure, LGFA is a council-controlled organisation. There are 31 shareholders, 30 councils, and the government. The government's the minority shareholder in this case. They only own 20%. It's a voluntary organisation. You don't have to borrow through us, but in fact we now have 77 out of 78 councils in New Zealand using us to borrow for their capital expenditure programs, and we now have a few other council-controlled organisations we lend to as well. So we are now part of the wallpaper for councils in terms of being their go-to place to raise cash for their CapEx programs. Over time, we've improved our business to the point now where we are AAA rated by Standard & Poor's, the same as the Crown, which is really important because, and we're listed on the NZX. And those things are really important for our offshore lenders who buy our bonds. And we have about 30% roughly of our $18 billion balance sheet now owned, or the bonds are owned by overseas investors. So we've got an incredibly important role, as does the Treasury or New Zealand Debt Office, when we raise capital offshore, providing them with evidence that we're doing a good job for them and that we will pay their debt back and pay their coupons. So I'd sort of say, for your listeners, we're probably the best example of how local and central government can work together. $5 million of taxpayers' money at the beginning has produced an entity that's now $18 billion. And is well supported by the councils.
Can I just ask, Craig, could I just ask you, how much say, I know they're only 20%, but obviously they're a big partner and an influential one. How much say do they have in terms of where you can get funding from? Do they put any restrictions as far as that goes of where you can look for people to invest?
No, not at all. So the kind of structure is the shareholders are represented by a shareholders' council of 10 members or 10 shareholders, and the 2 representatives from Department of Internal Affairs and Treasury, who are respective ministries that are shareholders, so the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Local Government, are at the shareholders' council table and are monitoring the board, and the board's made up of 5 independent directors and 1 council-appointed director, effectively. So we have an independent board with requirements to conform to Statement of Intent, which is our 3-year intentions around borrowing and lending to councils, which is signed off by our shareholders' council and our shareholders. So it's a very transparent organisation in that sense. You can go onto our website and see what we do, our objectives, our policies, our values, etc. So the Crown doesn't dictate what we do. It's a shareholder. It's not a borrower from us, obviously, but is vitally interested in us because we're part of the debt capital markets wallpaper framework, and we're important for councils because we're their cheapest source of debt. They can't borrow any cheaper than us, or necessarily for the maturities that we provide. So you can borrow technically out to 2037 to fund your capital expenditure programs, and we'll provide that finance on a tender basis, say every month for 6 weeks. So we're always open, we're always available, we always support councils. So it's an important part of our capital markets framework in New Zealand.
Fantastic. Now, one thing that I know that you were keen to talk about, and I'm dying to get your insight into this because I've seen some news on it bizarrely about Thames Water in the UK. Now, I heard a bizarre figure, a massive figure of the amount of debt they were in. I've heard that London might face water rationing very shortly. What do you know about it? What's going on? How on earth have they got into this situation?
Yeah, so I was alerted to this while I was on the New Zealand Initiative delegation to Ireland because it was a live topic in late June. So Thames Water services about 15 million people in the Greater London region, which you're probably well aware of, Miles. It was privatised in 1989. It's got a number of institutional shareholders who own the company. It's regulated by a strange creature called Ofwat. You might know what that actually means, but it's the water regulator in England. Late last month, the CEO of Thames Water resigned, and the issue at large effectively is their funding needs, still heavy funding needs required, and the question is who puts the money in to support them. Is it the shareholders or is it the Crown as a lender of last resort or a shareholder of last resort? And so you have an entity that's potentially, without knowing more detail because it's still not clear, but an entity that possibly has borrowed too much, has faced rapidly rising interest rates in England and has obligations to carry out capex, pay dividends from perhaps a diminished profit outlook. So I think the lesson in there for us in New Zealand, thinking about our future framework for water, is just to be careful about debt. I was taught that debt's a little bit like red wine, too much and it's terrible, a little bit, moderation is okay. So the question is always too much. So it's worth looking offshore around what are the issues that have been created by debt and servicing debt and what are the lessons for New Zealand. So I think it's sort of a timely thing to look at given the stage of our policy development in water.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea because perhaps with a bit of luck, we can avoid some of the mistakes that Thames Water's obviously made. I mean, I'm looking at things here that obviously they haven't managed the upgrading of their infrastructure in a timely manner. You know, they've got pipe and stuff there that's 150 years old that they're going to have to try and replace, and you would have thought they would have done that in a rolling pattern. You know, what sort of state are we at the moment with Three Waters stroke affordable waters in New Zealand? Yeah.
So we're at parliamentary legislation stage. So there are a couple of bills going through Parliament. It's at the select committee stage. Around submissions, etc. LGFA, Local Government Funding Agency, through our CEO, did a presentation last week on what LGFA does, so that the select committee members were clear on what we do today. Obviously, things have moved from 3 waters to affordable waters and from 4 entities to 10. We don't have a lot of detail in the public around what those entities look like, their credit ratings, for example, or their balance sheets, so that's still to be determined. So it's clearly changed a lot with a different minister in charge of that portfolio, and there's still work going on in Parliament and I suspect in DIA and Treasury around how those entities will be stood up.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, we look forward to keeping in touch with you, Craig, over the coming months, and you can keep us updated. And I'm just going to form a little council of Tawa myself and then come and borrow some money from you.
Well, good luck on that. Put your submission and we'll see what happens, Miles.
Okay, Craig Stobo there. Thank you very much indeed for your time.